Isolation or inner awakening, silence or self-discovery, loneliness or the beginning of becoming whole. Most people think of isolation like being stuck in a dark room, cut off, forgotten, maybe even broken. It's painted as something dangerous, something to escape from as fast as possible. We picture isolation as the enemy of connection, and maybe even of mental health. But what if that view is incomplete? What if isolation isn't always a problem to fix, but sometimes a path to follow? We're told that being alone means something's wrong, that if you're pulling away from people, you're slipping. But Jungian psychology has a different take. They see isolation not as a breakdown, but as a breakthrough. A powerful personal phase where you stop drowning in the noise of the world and finally start hearing yourself. So, is isolation always bad? Or could it be something necessary, maybe even sacred? In this video, we're going to take a closer look at what isolation really means from a Jungian lens, beyond the fear and into transformation. Welcome to Mantis Library. This is where we explore these solitary moments together, where we learn to see isolation not as something to fear, but as the quiet beginning of your next becoming. Let's begin. So, let's talk about isolation. Not the kind where you're just sitting alone on a Friday night because plans got cancelled. We're talking about a deeper kind of solitude. The kind that feels like life is pulling you away from everything and everyone, and you're not even sure why. Maybe it happens suddenly, like a breakup or a big change. Or maybe it creeps in slowly, when things and people that once felt close just don't anymore. In Jungian psychology, that kind of isolation isn't just a rough patch. It can actually be a meaningful part of your growth. Jung believed that sometimes we need to step away from the world to truly find ourselves. He wrote, "In each of us there is another whom we do not know." That line is powerful because it suggests that inside you, there's someone deeper, someone real that you haven't fully met yet. And the only way to meet that version of yourself is by getting quiet enough to hear them. And that's not easy. We're so used to being surrounded by noise, distractions, and other people's opinions. From scrolling through our feeds to keeping up appearances, it's all so loud. So when you suddenly find yourself in isolation, it can feel wrong, like you're falling behind or being left out. But Jung saw it differently. He saw this withdrawal as necessary, not forever, but long enough to hear your own thoughts again, long enough to remember who you are without the noise. Think of it like this. If your life was a radio station, isolation is when all the static clears and you finally tune in to the one voice that matters, your own. Jung called this process individuation. It's the journey of becoming your truest, most whole self. And a big part of that journey? Being alone for a while. Not just because you're broken, but because that's when things start to make sense in a way they never did before. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're not playing a role. You're just being. And that's when the real inner work begins. One of the most interesting parts of this is the idea of archetypes. Those deep patterns or symbols that live in all of us. And when it comes to isolation, the one that shows up is the hermit. You've probably seen it in tarot, an old wise figure holding a lantern, walking alone. But he's not lost, he's searching. He chooses to step away, not to disappear, but to gain insight. Jung believed that we all carry the hermit within us, and sometimes that part of us asks for space, not to escape, but to grow. But let's be real, solitude isn't always peaceful. When you're finally alone with yourself, things come up. Old fears, unhealed wounds, thoughts you've been avoiding. This is what Jung called the shadow, the darker parts of ourselves that we usually try to hide or ignore. And when there's no one else around to distract you, those parts show up. It's uncomfortable, but it's also a gift, because facing your shadow is how healing begins. Jung said, man's task is to become conscious of the contents that press upwards from the unconscious. In other words, we grow when we stop running from what's inside us, and isolation, while hard, creates the space for that kind of deep honesty. You start to see not just your flaws, but your patterns, the stories you've been telling yourself, the beliefs you've picked up that don't even belong to you, and slowly you start letting go of what no longer fits. What's beautiful is this kind of isolation doesn't make you weaker, it actually makes you stronger. It helps you understand your limits and your needs. It helps you realize what kind of life you actually want, not just the one you've been told to want. And when you come back from that space, and you will, you return clearer, calmer, more rooted in who you are. That's what Jung meant when he said, the self is found in solitude. He didn't mean you should be alone forever or shut the world out. He just meant that every now and then we need to step back, to get quiet, to listen. Because in that stillness, something shifts, something opens, and you begin to connect with the part of you that isn't performing, isn't trying to be liked, isn't trying to keep up. And here's the thing, we don't talk about this enough. When someone pulls back, we assume something's wrong. But what if they're just evolving? What if they're going through something deeply personal? Something that doesn't look like growth on the outside, but actually is. Maybe you've felt this too, the weird liminal or in-between state where nothing feels quite right, where you're questioning everything. It's disorientating, sure, but it's your own psyche saying, pause, go inward. That's not failure, that's the start of something real. But what happens when isolation doesn't feel empowering or sacred at all, but dark, confusing, and almost unbearable? There's a term that's been used throughout mystical traditions, the dark night of the soul. Jung might not have used those exact words, but he knew the experience well. He called it a confrontation with the unconscious. This isn't just solitude, it's when the silence starts to echo, when the walls close in, when you're face to face with everything you've buried under distractions. It can look like depression, anxiety, restlessness, or that deep feeling of meaninglessness that creeps in late at night. But Jung believed these weren't just symptoms to numb or escape from. He saw them as messages, signaling that something within us is trying to emerge. There's no coming to consciousness without pain, he wrote. That line might sound heavy, but it's also incredibly validating. You're not failing because you feel lost. You're in the middle of something powerful. The psyche isn't punishing you, it's urging you to grow. Jung himself went through this. After his break with Freud, he entered a period of deep internal chaos. He described hearing voices, seeing visions, feeling like his very identity was unraveling. And instead of suppressing it, he leaned in. He documented these experiences in what became the Red Book, a raw visual psychological journey where he met archetypes, inner figures, and parts of himself he had never confronted before. He didn't label it madness, he saw it as a necessary passage. He once said, "The experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego." In other words, in order to meet your real self, the version of you that you've carefully crafted, the ego has to crack a little. Sometimes a lot. And that's terrifying, because nobody teaches us how to sit with that kind of discomfort. We're taught to fix it, numb it, scroll past it. But what if we didn't? What if we listened? Still, it's important to say, not all isolation is healing. There's a difference between consciously choosing solitude and unconsciously slipping into alienation. Jung pointed this out too. He was deeply aware of the line between healthy withdrawal and being swallowed by the unconscious. One is a retreat to reconnect. The other is a retreat to disappear. This is where intention matters. Are you isolating because your soul needs quiet? Or are you running from the world because it feels too painful? Are you listening inward or just avoiding everything outward? It's a hard question, but it's worth asking, because the truth is, healing through solitude requires some level of presence. Jung warned that when we ignore the unconscious, it doesn't go away, it just shows up in ways we don't recognize. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So we need to bring some awareness into our isolation. Instead of just drifting through it, we can ask, what's surfacing for me here? What patterns, what memories, what fears? This is where psychological alchemy comes in, the transformation through inner work. Jung believed that solitude created a kind of psychic vessel, a safe container where parts of the self could meet and integrate. He saw practices like journaling, dream work, and quiet reflection as powerful tools. They help you see the imagery of your inner reality. When you're alone, your inner voices get louder, and some of them might be critical, afraid, or angry, but they all carry deep wisdom. Solitude gives them space to speak. Jung believed in honoring dreams, symbols, and imagination, not fantasy, but messages from the unconscious. He saw them as doorways, guides, parts of yourself that hold a crucial piece of your puzzle. And slowly through this process, you begin to shift. You begin to notice what's been controlling you unconsciously. Old roles, masks, assumptions. You begin to meet your shadow, your anima, or animus, your guides, your true self-meaning whole. All the bits of you, dark and light. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about becoming the whole of who you are. This is why Jung distinguished the using of the word self with a lowercase s, meaning the self-concept still driven by ego, with an unintegrated shadow still running amok at every turn, and the self with a capital S, meaning the whole of the person in its entirety, having integrated unconscious material to such a degree that they are no longer driven only by ego, with the usual outburst of shadow material. Eventually, isolation begins to shift. Maybe it's subtle at first. You start noticing a soft pull back towards the world. Not the version of the world that overwhelmed you, but something quieter, more aligned. This is where reintegration begins. Jung never saw isolation as a final destination. And this return is just as sacred as the solitude that came before it. In myth, it's the final act of the hero's journey, the return home. But the hero doesn't come back unchanged. They bring back something, a treasure, a truth, a shift in being. Jung often spoke of individuation as a spiral, not a straight line. We descend into ourselves to meet the unconscious and then rise again with more awareness, more wholeness. The real beauty is, after that journey, we often become the thing we needed. That's where Jung's idea of wounded healer comes in. The ones who have been broken open, the ones who have felt the depths, often become vessels of understanding for others. They can hold space for pain without flinching because they've known it. And that doesn't require a therapist's couch. It could be how you show up for a friend, how you speak differently, how you carry your story with softness instead of shame. And that's part of healing too. Realizing that your time in the dark wasn't wasted. That maybe, just maybe, it gave you a language for what others can't name. Jung believed that through working on ourselves, we contribute to the collective. Our personal growth isn't isolated, it's connected. He once said, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insolvable. They can never be solved, but only outgrown." In other words, you don't always find answers. Sometimes you become someone bigger than the question. Still, reintegration isn't always smooth. There's this weird feeling when you step back into regular life after a deep inward phase. It can feel disorientating, even lonely, because now you see things differently. You may crave more depth, or feel out of sync with the noise you once tolerated. That's okay. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means you've changed, and some relationships, routines, or ways of thinking might not fit anymore. That's part of the price and the gift of growth. Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." And that hits deep, because sometimes, after going through something transformational, you want to share what you've learned, but you don't know how, or people don't understand. That's one of the most bittersweet parts of transformation, but also one of the most empowering, because it reminds you of the responsibility to stay close to your truth, even if not everyone understands it. Over time, you begin to find others who do understand. Maybe not many, but enough. People who are also walking their own inner paths. That connection, rooted in authenticity, not performance, is one of the most nourishing things in the world. And it couldn't have happened without the solitude first. So maybe isolation isn't the enemy. Maybe it's the teacher we didn't know we needed. It strips away the noise, the roles, the shoulds, until what's left is something raw and real. And yes, that's terrifying, but also, underneath the fear, it's freeing. Because in the end, isolation might just be a doorway, not to despair, but to discovery. Not to exile, but to emergence. You go in to meet yourself and come out carrying pieces of the truth that you didn't know you were missing. So wherever you are on your journey, whether you're deep in the quiet, slowly resurfacing, or already sharing your light, know that it matters. Your story, your solitude, your return, it all matters. And if you liked this video, leave us a like and consider subscribing. Until next time, stay curious, stay mindful, and never stop exploring. We'll see you again in Mantis Library.